Hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Nahal and I am the host of the Bicentenary Meditation Project. And in today's video, I'm going to talk to you guys about why, for the majority of the meditations that we chose to do for the Bicentenary Meditation Project, has to do with connecting you to the sacred text. So, many people have argued about the validity of sacred texts, and I just wanted to give you a little background on the Baha'i writings, like sacred text, and where it comes from, and so on and so forth. So the Baha'i faith has a history of about 177 years right now. So in the time that it came, there were very educated people. There were like visors, there were scholars, there were like all these people. And so Baha'u'llah, when he came, pen and paper existed and all of these things, of course. And whenever he revealed revelation, there was like, he would always have like a secretary or a plethora of like many secretaries that were there to like just jot down, because the speed in which revelation came down was so fast. It was described as like a torrent, which is like really fascinating. And that whole process, it's like described as so overwhelming to the assistants, like that they were like jotting down and they had to use like shorthand and all these things. And then what they did was, once they did it in shorthand, then they would go back and write it like more beautifully in their own writing. And then they would go back and show Baha'u'llah what they wrote. And then Baha'u'llah would like make corrections and so on. So it's like, this was in my eyes, like this is what it is called like a scientific approach to like revelation. I mean, like, this was not something that like was written like many years after it was given. It was literally spoken, written down, boom, and then multiplied. Like, it was printed several times, like copied by hand several times, and then given to many other people. So this is the way in which revelation like came for this religion and this world religion. And so that's something that, like, you know, like we've all had our own doubts about, like, at least we've heard things about like other religions, like, you know, like maybe like the revelation was written down several years after like it was spoken, and then they're like, well, is it really true, and stuff like that. So within the Baha'i writings, like this kind of aspect or this like doubt or suspicion is kind of like removed in a sense, because in the Universal House of Justice, which is like essentially the caretaker of like all of the relics of Baha'u'llah's sacred writings, they have literally preserved his writings. And so you can actually go and see his text. Like, you can go and see like the sacred text, and like everything has been tested and validated. And it's just like the process is so like, it's so thorough that, you know, there are many different like methods and techniques and procedures that has to go through in order to like double check whether or not this is actually in fact Baha'u'llah's writings and the Bab's writings. And just recently we actually had like a prayer that was actually one of my favorite prayers. It was not written by Baha'u'llah or the Bab, but it was written by Abdu'l-Baha, and it was like recently taken out of the prayer books because they couldn't find the reference to it. And that was like such, it was very gutting because it was one of my favorite prayers. However, like that's how it works. It's like, well, we don't want to read things that are not really like straight from God, right? So the beauty of this is that since this aspect of the Baha'i sacred writings has this sort of very concrete, very real, very valid, very like straight up sort of like almost like a stamp on it, it's like you can't even argue. So this is actually also the reason why we don't have priests as like a mediary kind of interpreter to the sacred writings, because we all can read now. In the past, like there were many holy scriptures that were written, but the people at the time, they were not educated people. But at this moment in time, like there are not that many people who cannot read. But what is so beautiful about the Baha'i sacred writings is that there are prerequisites to understanding the Baha'i sacred text, and literacy and understanding the language are not one of them. So the ones, this is my interpretation, by the way, because the ones that are said as the prerequisites is having a purity of heart, chastity of soul, and independence of spirit. So it's like you can't be tied to blindly listening to someone else. It's like your own spirit has to testify to it in order for you to understand what the words are actually saying. So what's so beautiful in that prerequisite, you don't hear the fact that literacy is not there. And there's many examples of like early Baha'i believers who were not literate, but they were so enamored with Baha'u'llah and its writings that they felt like inferior because they couldn't read like very directly the sacred writings of like Baha'u'llah. And so, but then that like was not a measure of like a person's like belief or like spiritual growth. Like none of that matters. There's also other stories that like describe like whenever they met, this particular story that I'm remembering is of Abdu'l-Baha, is the son of Baha'u'llah, when he came to the West, that he had an interpreter with him. He could speak a little bit of English, and he chose whenever to speak in Farsi or in English. But one of the Western believers, when he was looking at the first time he met Abdu'l-Baha, he was so enamored with Abdu'l-Baha that he was wondering, why is there a person on the side interrupting him as he speaks?